My parents abandoned me at 6 for my sick sister, but when they came back 20 years later, begging for forgiveness, I gave them the answer they never expected and left them destroyed. I'm 26 years old. I work in digital marketing, and there's something I need to get off my chest because honestly, it's been driving me crazy lately. My biological parents, I mean, the people who brought me into this world and then basically threw me away when I was 6 years old, now want back into my life like nothing happened. Like they can just show up after 20 years and say, hey, we're sorry, can we be a family again? And the thing is, I don't know if I'm angry, sad, confused, or all of it at the same time, but I definitely need to tell this story from the beginning so it makes sense. When I was 6 years old, my life was pretty normal, I guess. I had a sister, Isabella, who was like 2 years younger than me, and we lived in a small but comfortable house with my parents, Brian and Michelle. I don't remember much from that time, honestly, but I do remember that Isabella was always sick. Like, it wasn't a normal cold or anything, it was something chronic that doctors couldn't fully understand. She spent a lot of time in hospitals, and my parents were constantly stressed about it, going back and forth to medical appointments and treatments and all that shit. I was young. I didn't really understand what was happening. I just knew my little sister was sick and that mom and dad were always worried. And then one day, I think it was summer because I remember it was hot and I was wearing a dinosaur t-shirt I loved. My parents took me to my grandparents' house, Barbara and Henry. They told me, you're going to stay here for a while we take care of Isabella. She needs a lot of attention right now and it'll be easier this way. I thought, well, okay. I liked being with my grandparents. They had a big yard and my grandmother always made cookies. I packed my backpack with some toys, my favorite stuffed animal, which was a brown bear named Teddy. Yeah, very origin. And said goodbye. I remember my mom gave me a quick hug and said, be good. And my dad just nodded, and they said they'd come soon. That was the last time I lived with them, though I didn't know it at the time. The first few weeks at my grandparents' house were weird, but not terrible. You know? I missed my room, I missed my stuff, but my grandparents were good to me. My grandmother made my favorite food, and my grandfather taught me to play chess, though I was terrible at it. But I kept waiting for my parents to come get me. Every time the phone rang, I thought, maybe it's mom saying she's coming. Every time I heard a car outside, I ran to the window thinking it was dad. But days went by and nothing. Just short calls where my mom would ask how I was and then say she had to go because Isabella needed something. It was my uncle Nicholas, my dad's younger brother, who finally told me the truth. He came often to see my grandparents, and one day he found me crying in my room because I missed my home. He sat on my bed, and I remember perfectly what he said. Alexander, you need to understand something. Your parents aren't coming back to get you anytime soon. Maybe they won't come back for a long time. Isabella is very sick, and they decided they need to focus completely on her. I was 6 years old, but I wasn't an idiot. I got what he was saying. They had abandoned me, basically. They had chosen my sister over me. And I was staying here, in this house that wasn't mine, with my grandparents, who were great but weren't my parents. I don't know exactly how much time passed, maybe 6 months or a year. Time is weird when you're a kid. But my grandparents started having trouble taking care of me full time. My grandfather Henry had health problems. Something with his heart, I think. So my uncle, Nicholas, and his wife Grace said I could go live with them. But they didn't have kids of their own. They lived in a bigger house, like half an hour from where my grandparents were, and they said they had space and time for me. So once again I packed my things, including Teddy, who by then was pretty worn out, and I moved in with them. And here's the thing. This is where my life really started to make sense again. Nicholas and Grace didn't treat me like a burden or like a favor they were doing for the family. They treated me like their son from day one, like literally from the moment I walked through their door. Grace showed me my room, which they had decorated with superhero posters because somehow they knew I liked them. And she told me, this is your home now. You can do whatever you want with it. Nicholas took me to the park that same weekend, and we played soccer, and I wasn't good, but he patiently taught me how to kick the ball properly. They were small things, but after months of feeling like a nuisance, like something that had been left behind, I finally felt like someone wanted me there. When I was like 8 years old, something natural. I started calling them Mom and Dad. It wasn't planned or anything. One day at breakfast, I said to Grace, "Mom, can you pass me the milk?" And she froze for a second, and I thought, shit, I messed up. But then she smiled with tears in her eyes and passed me the milk and said, "Of course, my love." After that, that's what I called them, and they never corrected me or told me it was weird. To me, they were my real parents. The ones who were there when I had nightmares, the ones who went to all my school presentations, the ones who taught me to ride a bike and patched me up when I fell and scraped my knees. My biological parents, Brian and Michelle, showed up from time to time, like every 6 months or a year, and those visits were the worst. They'd come to my grandparents' house or sometimes to Nicholas and Grace's house, and it was super awkward because they were basically strangers to me at that point. They'd ask me generic things like, "How's school going?" And I'd answer in monosyllables because, honestly, what did they want me to say? Did they want me to act like they were my parents? Because they weren't. Not in any way that mattered. I remember one visit when I was like 9 years old, maybe 10, where my biological mom tried to hug me and I went stiff as a board, and she got upset and started crying. And my biological dad looked at me like I was the bad guy in the story. But like, really? I was the bad guy for not wanting to pretend everything was okay? Isabella was still sick. I knew that because my grandparents kept in touch with Brian and Michelle and told me how she was doing. Part of me felt guilty for being angry, because it wasn't her fault for being sick, obviously. But another part of me, the part that was 11 years old and had just decided I wasn't going to reach out to my biological parents anymore. I thought, why did she deserve to have them, and I didn't? Why wasn't there room for both of us in their lives? I know it sounds selfish, and it probably was, but I was a kid, and I was hurt and angry, and no one had really explained to me properly why things were the way they were. That visit when I was 11 was the last time I really tried to connect with them. It was at my grandparents' house. It was my birthday, I think, and they came with a gift. It was a video game console that was honestly really cool but felt like an attempt to buy my affection. We were there for like 2 hours, eating cake and making forced conversation, and at one point my mom said, "We miss having you at home so much," and I just thought, really? Because I was available to be missed for 5 years, and you chose not to. I didn't say anything out loud, just nodded and kept eating my cake. But after they left, I told Nicholas I didn't want to see them anymore. That there was no point in pretending we had a relationship when we clearly didn't. He understood. He didn't judge me or tell me I was being dramatic. He just said, "Okay, no one's going to force you to do anything you don't want to." When I was 14, Nicholas and Grace sat down with me and we had a serious conversation. They told me they had never been able to have children biologically, that they had tried for years before I came into their lives, and that when they got the opportunity to take care of me, they felt like the universe was giving them the family they had always wanted. They asked me if I had ever thought about the possibility of them adopting me officially, legally changing my last name and everything. Honestly, I hadn't thought much about it, because to me, they were already my parents. The legal paperwork seemed almost redundant, but I told them, yes, of course yes. They said they wanted to wait until I was older so it would be my decision, that they didn't want to force anything while I was still a minor and might change my mind. On my 18th birthday, we went to court and made it official. I signed papers. The judge said some legal things. I don't remember well because I was pretty emotional, and I walked out of there legally, being Nicholas and Grace's son. We changed my last name to theirs, and I remember, Mom, Grace, cried the whole way home. But they were happy tears. We had dinner at my favorite restaurant, an Italian place that made incredible lasagna, and we toasted with Coca-Cola because I still wasn't of legal drinking age, though Dad said I could have some wine, but I didn't want to. It was one of the best days of my life. I literally felt like everything had finally fallen into place, you know? I had a real family, parents who loved me and who chose to be with me, not because they had to, but because they genuinely wanted to. I started college that same year, studied marketing because I'd always liked the idea of advertising and social media and all that stuff, and my parents supported me completely. We didn't have much money. Like, we weren't rich or anything, but they made sure I could go to a good university, without having to go into debt with student loans. They worked extra shifts, saved, made sacrifices I probably don't even know about, and never, not once, made me feel like I was a burden or like I owed them anything. That's what real parents are like, I guess. When I was 20 years old, I was in my second year of college, and I got a call from my grandmother, Barbara. She told me that Isabella had passed away, that her illness had finally been too much after years of fighting it. She was like 22 years old, I think, or maybe 21. I'm not exactly sure. I felt something weird when I found out, a mix of sadness for her because, even though I didn't really know her, she was still my sister biologically, and also a kind of strange guilt because part of me thought, and now what? Were my biological parents going to remember I existed now that she wasn't here anymore? It sounds horrible to say it like that, but that's what I was thinking. I went to the funeral because I felt I should, mostly for my grandparents, who had been good to me and who were devastated. It was at a small church. There were quite a few people because Isabella apparently had met a lot of people through all her treatments and support groups and that. I saw Brian and Michelle from a distance. They looked destroyed, obviously, and I didn't approach them. I stayed in the back with my parents, Nicholas and Grace, and after the service we left without talking to anyone, beyond offering condolences to my grandparents. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I just didn't know what to say, and frankly, I didn't want to have that conversation there at my sister's funeral. But things got weird after that. It was December, like 2 or 3 weeks after the funeral, and my family, Nicholas, Grace, my grandparents and I, went to midnight mass on Christmas because it's a tradition we had. We were leaving the church. It was late and cold, and suddenly Brian and Michelle appeared out of nowhere. My biological mom said, "Alexander, we need to talk to you." And I froze. I literally didn't know what to do. They started talking about how they'd been thinking a lot about me, about how now that Isabella was gone, they wanted to rebuild our relationship, and I just looked at them thinking, are you seriously doing this here, in a church parking lot on Christmas Eve? Something in me broke at that moment. Like all the rage I'd been holding for years just came out. I looked at them directly and said, "I'm sorry. I think you're confusing me with someone else. I don't know you." And I turned around and got in the car with my parents. My biological mom yelled my name. She sounded desperate, but I didn't turn around. Nicholas started the car and we left. And the whole way home, nobody said anything because we all knew it was something that had to happen eventually. After that, the letters started. Like, actual letters by physical mail, not emails or text messages, but handwritten letters on paper with an envelope, and stamp, and everything. The first one arrived, like a week after Christmas. It was from Michelle, my biological mom, and basically said she understood I was angry, but they never stopped thinking about me. That they had done what they believed was right at the time by focusing on Isabella because she needed so much care, and that now they wanted to be part of my life again. The second letter came like 2 weeks later. This one was from Brian, and it was more or less the same but with different words, saying they were sorry and that they wanted to get to know me, that they wanted to know who I had become. I received like 5 letters total over a period of 2 months, and I read them all but didn't respond to any. I didn't know what to say. Honestly. Part of me understood, in theory, that they had been in an impossible situation with a chronically ill daughter who required constant attention. But another part of me, the part that had been a 6-year-old boy waiting for his parents to come get him, and they never did, just couldn't forgive them. I couldn't forget all those nights crying because I missed my home. All those birthdays and Christmases where they were barely present. All those years feeling like I wasn't important enough for them to make space for me in their lives. I talked to my parents about this, obviously, because I wasn't going to make any decision without consulting them first. Mom told me she would understand if I wanted to give Brian and Michelle a chance, that she would never feel threatened or jealous because she knew nothing could change the relationship she and I had. Dad was more direct. He told me, "Look, they had 20 years to be in your life and chose not to. But if you feel you need to close that circle, we support you. That's what real parents do. They support you even when the decision is difficult or uncomfortable." I finally decided to write them a response, not for them but for me, because I needed to make clear how I felt. The letter wasn't long, like maybe a page, and basically said, "I understand you were in a difficult situation, and I don't blame you for taking care of Isabella because she needed it. But you abandoned me. and that's a fact I can't just ignore. And you left me with my grandparents, without even properly explaining what was happening. And for years, I felt like I wasn't important enough to you. Now, I have a family that loves me unconditionally, parents who chose to be with me, and I'm not ready to forgive or to have a relationship with you. Maybe someday I will be. I don't know. But right now I need you to respect my space and my decision. I sealed the letter, put it in an envelope, went to the post office and sent it. I felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders, honestly. It wasn't a cruel letter or trying to hurt them on purpose, but it was honest, and I think that's what I needed. I needed them to know I wasn't going to pretend everything was okay just because they now had time. For me, that things don't work like that. Since then, like 6 months ago, I haven't heard anything more from them. I don't know if they received my letter and decided to respect my decision, or if they just gave up, but they haven't contacted me again. My grandparents say they're doing okay. That they moved to another state, I think. Trying to start over after everything with Isabella. Part of me wonders if I'll ever have a relationship with them, if in 10 or 20 years I'm going to regret being so harsh. But most of me knows I made the right decision, at least for now. I'm good where I am, you know? I have parents who love me. I have grandparents who were always there when I needed them. I have a life I built with the support of people who genuinely care about me. Brian and Michelle had their chance to be my parents and they wasted it, and now they have to live with those consequences. Maybe I'm an asshole for thinking that way. I don't know, but that's how I feel. Sometimes I think about Isabella and wonder what our relationship would have been like if things had been different. If she hadn't been so sick. If my biological parents had found a way to be there for both of us. But that's not the reality I lived, and I can't build a relationship with them based on hypotheticals. Last week was my mom's birthday, Grace. She turned 55, and we had a family dinner with my grandparents and some close friends. We were all there laughing and telling stories, and at one point she looked at me from across the table and smiled at me, and I just thought, this is what matters. This is my family. These people who chose to love me when no one else did. Who gave me a home when I didn't have one. Who never made me feel like I was less important than anything else in their lives. And that's enough for me, I guess. It's more than enough.